Survival is all about staying alive under emergency conditions anywhere in the world. Survival is not just for the camper, climber, or pilot. It's for everyone, young and old, because anyone can be confronted by a survival situation. The more knowledge you have, the greater your confidence and ability to handle any situation. This program will provide you with that knowledge and the skills that will build that confidence. Lofty Wiseman served with the British Army's Elite Special Air Services, the SAS, for 26 years. After spending years learning survival techniques firsthand in the Arctic, desert, and jungle in such places as Malaya, Borneo, Aden, Belize, and Kenya, Lofty became the chief survival instructor in the SAS. Since leaving the SAS, Lofty established the School of Survival in England, which has students from all walks of life from all around the world. In 1986, Lofty's book, the SAS Survival Handbook, was published, and it became the #2 bestseller in England. It's currently in print in 7 languages. In addition to these activities, Lofty serves as a consultant to law enforcement agencies, corporations, security firms, and elite military units worldwide. Lofty, are you ready to tell us what we need to know to survive in a harsh world?
Yes, Steve, I sure am.
Okay, so how did you get so involved in survival training, Lofty?
Survival is a basic military skill, and we never knew where we was going to find ourselves in the world, and we was always on the long line of resupply, and so we had to have the ability to live off the land.
You know, I read in the newspaper about people who have survived in very difficult situations, and they aren't the kind of people you would expect to survive. What makes a survivor?
Steve, they've all got one thing in common, and this is mental determination. Survival is all about, mental toughness. It's probably 80% of mental exercise and only 20% of physical exercise.
Fitness must be important, though.
Sure, the fitter you are, the better you can apply yourself. But remember, survival's for everyone, the young and the old, and it's no good, say, climbing a tree for 1,000 calories of fruit and you've expended 2,000 calories to obtain them. So we must think things through, assess the situation, make sure everyone is safe, give them all a job to do, and get the best from them. Okay,
in order to do that, you've got a program. You've got a series of things you've got to think about. What do we have to think about to do that right?
Okay, what we must learn about is food, fire, shelter, water, navigation, and medical. They're the main elements of survival.
Well, that's an awfully lot to think about. How do I know what the priorities are? What should I think about first?
Okay, what we do, Steve, we put all these elements into an acronym called PLAN. Now, P stands for protection, L for location, A, acquisition, and N for navigation.
All right, tell me a little more. What do you mean by protection?
Okay, however we find ourselves in a survival situation, okay, be it an aircraft crashing and there's a likelihood of exploding fuel, we must have protection from further danger. So we evacuate the immediate area. Likewise, there might be an impending avalanche or a forest fire. We mustn't stay in its path. So protection from further danger, and then protection from the elements. We make a shelter to give us protection from the rain, the wind, or in the tropics, the sun. Next, location. We must put our signals out. We want to be found. And so we draw attention to ourselves by making signal fires, air panels, etc. Now, while we want to be rescued, we're going to be hungry and thirsty. So A stands for acquisition of food and for water. Then finally, navigation. Once we've used all the local resources in the area, we've got to think about moving out to safety if the rescue don't come maybe within 3 weeks, because we've used all the firewood, all the animals have been eaten, all the plants have been gone, and so what we must do is think about moving. Because we're open to disease now, however good we practice personal and camp hygiene, okay, we're going to soil the area, so now we think about moving. So navigation is the last thing we do.
3 to 4 weeks, that's a long time. How long do you need to be prepared to survive?
Yep, there's no time limit on survival. We must survive all our life. It's a full-time job, and so life, we survive until we die.
All right, I've got the right mental attitude. I know what's important. I've got a plan for putting that into effect. Is there anything I can take along with me to give me a little edge?
Okay, Steve, we always say carry a survival tin. Now, this should be carried in a pocket at all times. Not when you go to the wild, but even in the town. Whether you go ballroom dancing or walking a dog. A small tin like this gives you the ability to make or acquire food, fire, shelter, water, navigation and medical. You'll see a lot of these items being used throughout the program. But basically, it's got a flint for lighting a fire, a small piece of candle, again for fire lighting, needle and thread for running repairs on clothing, a scalpel blade which you can skin, prepare game with, a flexible saw, some chemicals, medications, plasters for general abrasions, and it's a real bonus in a survival situation if you've got your tin with you.
That's an awfully lot to find in a very small tin. Let's say I'm making a trip where the possibility of finding myself in a real emergency situation, a survival situation, is a little higher than the average trip. What else might I take along?
Okay, Steve, everyone should also carry, when they go to the wild, a survival pouch. Now, there's much more equipment on here. This is on the belt, carried at all times. It's got a flashlight, which we can use for signalling, and also we'll show you how to light a fire with this. And there's a container which we can boil our water, cook our food in, with a stove, okay, for cooking, flares so we can be found, air marker panels, and a variety of stuff. Again, a lot of this you'll be seeing used on the program.
Okay, out of all of this equipment, what's the single most important piece of survival gear?
Steve, you must have a knife. Okay, this is a small folding lock knife, and so it's got a positive lock on it. And again, we use this for making a shelter, preparing game, and lighting a fire. It's an essential part of our equipment, and we must look after it.
That knife looks pretty small. What could I take along that'd be just a little bit more effective?
Okay, Steve, this is a parang, and it's an excellent tool, not only for the jungle, but for anywhere in the world. Effectively, it's 3 tools in one. From here to here, it's very sharp, and we use this for skinning, preparing vegetables for cooking. From here to here, it's like the axe, and all the heavy work is done by cutting trees. And from here to here, again, it's very sharp, and we can use it for preparing skins for clothing, etc. Now, in the jungle, it gets very slick and sweaty, so we use the thong so it won't come out of the hand when we're using it. Now, in the jungle, if anyone gets injured, we've got to prepare a landing site for a helicopter. And many times in the regiment, we use these all the time for cutting large trees, mahoganies and teak, up to 4 foot in diameter, and it's got to be done fast so the helicopter can come in and save the guy's life. So we thoroughly recommend this. Also, in the jungle, it's possible to make a raft and float down a large river to safety. So anywhere in the world, the parang, okay, the serious adventure should carry one.
Okay, Lofty, you've shown us a lot. Now, let's go out in the field and begin our survival training.
Remember the acronym PLAN. P for protection. That's protection from further danger, then protection from the elements. L stands for location. We want to be found. A is acquisition of food and water. While we're waiting to be rescued, we're going to get hungry, and more important, we're going to be thirsty. N stands for navigation. If no one rescues us, finally, we might have to walk to safety. Now, protection is our first concern. It's no good trying to build a shelter on a hilltop. We're going to be cold and exposed to the weather. So what we must have, our prime concern, is water. We're going to find water down in the valley. Also, we need material to build a shelter from, and hopefully find some food. This looks an ideal spot for a shelter, because one, there's plenty of material to build a shelter. It's near water, but not directly on it, so there's no risk of flooding. There's plenty of fuel for a fire. There's no deadfalls to come crashing down. There's no bees, wasps or hornets in the trees. And there's a nice open area to the front where we can lay out our emergency signals. Let's build a lean type shelter. Okay, for a start, what I've done, I've put a crossbar between 2 trees and about 4 foot high. And then a 45-degree angle, I put the back stakes in. I've dug them in the ground and leant them forward. I've now got to put poles all the way along here, 45-degree angles, about 18 inches apart. Now I've got the vertical ones in, I've got to put the horizontal sticks in. Now the spacing depends on what I'm going to use for thatch. Make sure it's strong. Remember, weave the horizontals in and out the verticals to lock them in place. It must be strong because this is going to protect you. Now what seems like a shortcut, ultimately it takes more time in the long run. If this falls down or lets in the rain, we've got to rebuild it. So let's do it right first time. There are many materials we can use to thatch the shelter. Grasses, rushes, even mud. In this case, we're going to use pine boughs. Okay, we start from the bottom and we start building it all the way across and then overlapping until we've covered the frame. We must ensure we put lots of this on to keep out the rain. That's the back finished. Now we've ensured there's no holes in it and it's thick enough to repel any rain. The 45-degree angle is also very important. Now we can improve this further by filling in the sides. What we do is exactly the same as the back. We angle in verticals and we intertwine the horizontals and then we thatch it. Now this gives us more room. We can stow our firewood there, we can put equipment there, and it also stops the wind from whistling around the sides. We can further improve on this by putting on the front porch. This is easily done. Just angle in 2 sticks, put on the crossbar, and what we're going to do now is bring the thatch over, and this gives us more leg room, and also when we build a fire here, we're going to get convection currents going right the way to the back of the shelter. Now, we've got paracord and we've got wire in the survival tin, but what we can do, or what we can use, is natural materials. This is just a vine, and if we take it easy enough, and this is green, we can get a lash in. So I'm just going to lash this on here. Now, using a vine, it's important to keep it nice and tight and to overlap it several times, and it would be quite sturdy. Now to finish up, we just push it through between the two, take it round, and this will lock it securely in position. Now I've got a good strong shelter, I don't care what the weather does. I'm going to be dry, and once I get a fire going, I'm going to be warm. Now the idea of this front porch is my fire's to the front, and I'm going to get convection currents going right the way to the back of the shelter and keep me warm. This shelter is good for the rain, the wind and the snow. However, when I go to the tropics, I need to construct a different type of shelter. Let's go and have a look what I've got over here. This is a pole bed built on an A-frame. It's very strong, and the more weight you put on it, the stronger it becomes. Now this is ideal when you've got bad ground conditions, such as you find in the jungle with creepy crawlies and ants and termites. It gets you off the ground. Also, in hot climates, you need the cooling effect of the air going underneath the bed, keeping you cool. Now in the jungle, it rains very hard and it comes unexpectedly, so we need a shelter fast. This will keep me dry, and so will a parachute teepee. Let's go and see how we make one. This is a parachute teepee. It's easily put up, and remember, a parachute is part of our life-preserving equipment. Now, as long as it's steep enough, it will repel the rain, it will keep off the wind, and in the sun, it offers good shade. Why don't you come inside and have a look? As you can see, it's larger than it looks from the outside. Now remember, keep off the walls when it's raining and you won't get wet.
Really interesting shelters, Lofty. If you were in a colder climate, the Arctic for instance, what would you use there?
Okay, in the Arctic we would use the snow. We can either dig down and make a snow hole or build up and make an igloo. No matter where we find ourselves in the world, we can always make a shelter. In the desert we must have shade. So again, we can dig down, put some material up, get shade from the sun. On the plains we can dig down or use sod and build a shelter. So no matter where you find yourself in the world, there's always natural materials we can use.
Let me ask you about the pole bed. I didn't quite see how you constructed that. Could you demonstrate that for us here?
Okay, the pole bed, this is a model of it. We start by digging in, okay, our A-frame, dig them securely into the ground, and it's best if we can either lean them against a tree or build like a triangular and dig this one in, and this will prevent that from toppling. We then take our material, and in the sleeves provided, we insert our poles, and then this goes on the top, And the more weight we put down on this, okay, the firmer it becomes. We now put our shoulder over the top, making a basher, and this protects us from the elements.
You know, I noticed in that last shot when you were inside the teepee, there wasn't a center pole. I would have expected a center pole. How do you handle that?
With the parachute, what we do is at the apex, we've got a cord and we tie a rock to this and we throw it over a convenient branch and we hoist it up, and as the parachute hangs down, we then peg it to the ground, making sure we've got a nice steep angle, and we peg it nice and wide, and you can see how big it was. It gives us adequate protection.
Really interesting. Okay, we've covered shelters. Now let's go back out in the field for another aspect of protection.
Now we've built our shelter, we can consider lighting a fire. Now fire can mean the difference between life and death in a survival situation. We must be able to light a fire under any condition, anywhere in the world. Now there are 3 important points to remember. First, use standing deadwood. 2, with a sharp knife, we feather our wood. And 3, keep your matches dry. Now I'll show you what I mean over here. This is the shaven wood. Remember, we take standing deadwood and we shave it with our sharp knife. What we do, we keep on turning the wood around and cutting slivers, and so one match will ignite this. Now any pieces drop in, they go in the fireplace and can be used. This is what we're going to use for our tinder. Now here's a selection of tinder. This one here is birch bark and it burns just like paper. This is burlap, and as long as it's natural material, i.e. it's not nylon or plastic, this is sisal, hemp or jute, cotton wool, different dried grasses and sedges, and shaven wood. Pine resin is an excellent way of lighting a fire. Just collect it and use it like a candle. Also, if you lose a filling, the resin can be used to plug the gap, and when it reaches the moisture of the mouth, it solidifies and acts as a temporary filling. Remember, good tinder takes the merest of sparks to ignite. We've got our tinder arranged now, and we need one match to ignite it. Let's have a look at some different types of matches. Don't carry matches like this, as it's only a matter of time before they get wet, either through sweat or from the rain. This is a waterproof container, and it contains waterproof matches. However, these matches must be struck on a special surface, and this is on the outside of the container. So although the matches are dry, if this gets wet, it renders the matches useless. This is the ideal container. Again, it's waterproof, but now it contains strike anywhere matches. It has also got a flint on the base of it, and we'll show you how this is used in a minute. Okay, now we put on our kindling and arranging it like a wigwam. And it's as easy as that to light a fire. Don't disturb the fire, it doesn't like being disturbed. Just add to it. Once you've got a good hot fire going, then we start feeding on the main fuel. Now don't bother to cut these, just end feed them on and arrange them like a star. This way they would catch. The fire's burning merrily, we can do all our cooking, we can boil our water. As the fire dies down and we don't need to cook, we just separate these slightly, and this way we're going to conserve our fuel. Now you can see how easy it is to light a fire as long as you follow those 3 basic rules. 1, collect standing deadwood. 2, shave it. 3rd, keep your matches dry and in a proper container. Now it's all very well when you've got matches, but if you've got no matches, there's other methods we can use. The first one we're going to show is the magnifying glass. Use the glass to intensify the sun's rays. Get as small as dot as possible and direct it onto your tinder. In this case we've got some cotton bud, and also burnt wood is ideal. Another method of lighting a fire is using a flint from the survival tin. Arrange cotton, shave your wood as before, and use your knife, scrape the flint, ignite the cotton, and then put this on top. And away she goes. This is a magnesium block with a flint to the back. In difficult conditions, we can shave magnesium off the block, collect them on our tinder, and then use the flint to ignite the magnesium. Now you see how readily that burns. Remember, aircraft are made out of the same material. Another way of lighting fires is using chemicals. Take the potassium permanganate from the survival tin and pour a small pinch of it here. Add a pinch of sugar, mix it together, and we can ignite this using friction, spark or glycerine. It's unlikely that you've got potassium chlorate with you like this. However, it is found in some throat tablets. As before, we add a pinch of sugar. Now sugar is the oxidizing agent. We mix it together, and now we can ignite this either by spark, friction or sulfuric acid. We find sulfuric acid in a battery in a vehicle. In this case, we're going to use a spark. Now the last chemical we're going to look at is sodium chlorate. Now this is a common weed killer. I've prepared some here as before, just a pinch of sugar, and we're going to ignite it by spark. As you can see, this burns very fiercely and must be used with extreme caution. It must only be used as an expedient survival technique. Now the next method I'm going to use is equally as dangerous. We're going to use ammunition and pyrotechnics. Now hunters and military personnel will probably have these with them. I'm going to carefully cut through the case and expose the propellant inside. Now we must do this carefully. I'm now going to cut through the wadding. And now I've exposed the powder. We tip some of it out, and this is what I'm going to ignite. Now that burns very fast, so you must be prepared and have your fire prepared. Now we're going to go into pyrotechnics. Now flares contain magnesium, and we'd be foolish to start cutting these in half. So we're going to use another technique. Let's have a look over here. This is a typical distress flare, and when activated it fires a solid block of magnesium at great speed. So to light a fire from it, I must do it very carefully. Here I prepared a fireplace with lots of energy absorbing material, and then I'm going to fire the flare into this, and it's going to ignite all the dry brush that I prepared there. As you can see, it's very effective. Most aircraft carry this type of flare gun. We can light a fire with it exactly as we did before, but remember, there's more energy in this cartridge, so we must be very, very careful. Now we've shown different ways of lighting fires, and when all else fails, we're going to go back to nature. We're going to use the bow drill method, 2 pieces of wood. Let's see how it's done. These are the components for the bow drill. We have the bow, cotton bandage, the baseboard, spindle and top board. What I've got to do first is to prepare the baseboard for the spindle. I take my knife and I make it flat. I make a slight indentation so the spindle can rotate in it. Now the principle behind this is the basewood is soft and the spindle is hard. So once we located it in its socket and rotated it with the drill, the hardwood, it grinds away to the softwood, and it's important to cut this keyway in to collect the very fine tinder that is generated. The more pressure we put on the bow, this starts glowing just like a cigarette end. We transfer it to our tinder, and then by blowing, we get a flame. Now as you can see, that took a lot of time, and you must practice it. Let me give you a few more tips on lighting the fire. Remember, in the survival kit we carry a candle. Now when you light a match, always light your candle first, whether you're going to light a cigarette, your stove or start a fire. And what we do, we use this under the fire. As soon as it starts going, we recover the candle, put it out, and we only use a small piece of it. Now we can take pine resin and make a candle. It burns exactly the same,